Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, Father.
It is kind of ironic that our first opening prayer talks about the hidden richness of Christ, and all the readings talk about the reality that is somewhat negative, the temptation of Christ. Years ago, there was a controversial movie entitled The Last Temptation of Christ. And before it was shown, people were condemning it without having seen it. But the last temptation of Christ, as the story would unfold, has to do with something eminently biblical that we will celebrate in less than 40 days. And that has to do with the passion, the death, the resurrection, the death of Jesus Christ. That was the last temptation. And you know very well that the devil was very, very busy then trying to shoo him away from that last act of fidelity to his Father. And the Lord himself, we will hear this during Holy Week, Lord, if it is possible, take this cup away from me. And that was the last temptation of Christ, a temptation where he arose victorious. The hidden richness of Christ is referred to in the second reading that we heard. He talks about the real foundation of everything we do, including the fasting, the prayer, and the almsgiving, is the fact that he arose victorious by rising from the dead and was utterly victorious over everything that is related to death, including the ultimate death, which is sin. That is what we proclaim. In the first Sunday of Lent, there is some kind of an artificial contradiction. In the opening prayer, we were told when we asked God that we may rejoice in the hidden richness of Christ. In the first reading, Moses tells us to remember the past, remember the pain in Egypt, remember the imprisoned enslavement and the sufferings that the people of God experienced in Egypt. But then Moses tells them the priests will have to offer the first fruits. And he was talking about a basket of first fruits to be offered to a God of history, a God who directs the course of human events, and a God who calls to salvation. And then the second reading tells us that the core, the node, the central point of everything we remember and everything we do in the act of remembering, in the act of memorializing, has to do with the utter victory of Christ after his death on the cross. It has to do with the resurrection. In other words, the hidden richness of Christ refers to faith, hope, and love. I would like to hark back to hope because we are very hopeless in many ways, humanly speaking. The world is on the brink of a third world war, if you haven't noticed it yet. And if I'm not demonizing anybody, I'm not demonizing Putin, I am not sanctifying NATO and the United States, because we do know in history that you cannot reduce every discussion to a discussion between good and evil. Because there is good in Putin and there is evil in Putin, but there is also evil in the so-called democratic countries. And what is the evil? Hiding behind economic supremacy. And don't tell me that that is totally good. I'm not demonizing anybody, but we are on the brink of another world war. And if somebody decides to release the many stockpile of nuclear weapons that are now being held not only by America but by Russia, by Iran, by China, by Britain, the United Kingdom, by France, by the rest of the so-called democratic world, then you cannot reduce the discussion between the devil Putin and the saintly Biden, or the devil whoever and the saintly color of yellow then turn pink or red or whatever. You cannot reduce the discussion to just a discussion of good and evil. Why? Because just look at me, just look at you. We are all guilty of evil. Time and time again, we don't do the good all the time. I'll be telling you a story where I'm still grieving. I'm still begging God to have mercy on me because I missed an important thing in the last 2 weeks that I'm very, very sorry about. I'll tell you later. The story of the Gospel of Luke about the three temptations is a story of you and me. Why? Food is everything, something that we all want to have. We want to eat good food. We want to have fine dining all the time. We just don't want to eat Jollibee every day or McDonald's. Food is something that everybody needs. And the devil knew it. He was hungry for 40 days. He didn't eat anything except water and bread maybe. And so he was hungry, so he gave him the most valued thing that anyone who was deprived for all of 40 days would most likely grab. Turn these stones into bread. But the Lord remained triumphant, victorious, and said, one does not live on bread alone. He made a choice. He made a choice for the higher thing. Even if the lower thing was something that appeared so good and so pleasant that one can grab it given the opportunity. And then the devil showed him all the power and the glory that could be his. The only thing you need to do that, tit for tat, kneel down in front of me, and you will get all the glory and the power that you are longing for. The Lord, in the second temptation, said the right thing. You shall worship the Lord your God, and Him alone shall you serve. And then something that is now being sought for by at least 8 candidates for the presidency. What is this? Throw yourself down from here. Focus your attention on yourself, because there will be fire and brimstone, there will be lightnings and thunders, and the Lord will lift you up. The Lord will show them who you are. And therefore throw responsibility for yourself to the dogs, and let the power of God take over. And the Lord passed the supreme test and said, you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. And now, the good news for all of us. We are all tempted, not in the stature that the Lord was tempted, the 3 great temptations prior to the last temptation on Calvary, but we are also tempted by little things. We are tempted to be a little desirous too much of inconsequential things. Pinag-aawayan natin ang maliliit na bagay. Pinag-aawayan natin kung sino ang mas tanyag sa social media, who has the more likes and who has less likes, who has less followers and who has more followers. I for one know this. We have a growing number of very young priests who are very popular now in social media, because they are digital natives. And we who are older, who belong to a different generation, don't quite do as they do in TikTok, as they do in WhatsApp, or in Facebook, or in Twitter. We just don't have it. But the popularity is not necessarily the most important thing. Of course, I'm not saying this to put them down. I'm saying this because I accept the fact that I cannot even compete in that line. But I have to do what I do best, and that is to preach in season and out of season. And today, I would like to remind us all that the temptation we have to do with little things. It has to do with the sin of indifference. And Pope Francis has been talking about the globalization of indifference. The big thing about us now is that we have grown complacent, indifferent. It was not like the first quarter storm of the early 70s where young people were so committed to right injustice and to right wrongs. And we were in Menjola, we were in EDSA, we were everywhere else where the action was. But the young people are in front of their gadgets. Warm bodies have been replaced by the fingers. And we now do the talking with the fingers, with the likes and the emoticons and the GIFs. And people have grown so indifferent. And now I tell my story. I've been saying Mass for the longest time in Divine Grace Chapel, part of the parish of Padre Pio. And over the past few months, there was this little boy. Well, he was little for his age. He was 15 years old, turning 16 on March 18. And he struck me in the beginning. I thought, well, he's just one of those altar servers who have nothing better to do than to be with his barkada or friends and serve in church. But then last month, the sisters, the Baptistine sisters, asked me if he could be allowed to give a short talk after the Mass about Saint Alfonso Maria Fusco, the founder of the Baptistine sisters. And I said yes after the Mass. And when he spoke like as if he was a 25-year-old, not a 15-year-old. He was mature beyond his age. And he was very thin and frail. I didn't tell anybody then, but I said, this boy won't last. He appears so sickly. And then 2 weeks ago, when he was the only server at Mass, after Mass, I talked to him, I chatted with him. And then at the end, I patted him on the head. And he turned to me and gave me a gaze that I will never forget. The only second time in my life that I saw such limpid eyes, mga matang nangungusap, mga matang naglalaman ng mga bagay na hindi ko matumbasan ng salita. It was a gaze of faith, a gaze of hope, even as it was a gaze uttering a wordless goodbye. And I missed the opportunity. I kept mental tab of it, and at that moment I said, I saw eyes like this 20 years ago, when another former student, a little older than him, gave me that look. And the following day or a few days after, he died. I missed the opportunity to learn from a holy boy. Somebody who was serving God so unobtrusively, so simply, and I missed the opportunity to commune with a potential saint, a potential Dominic Savio. And I resolved, when I learned of his death last Sunday, I have to write a book about him. I have to find out all about him, because that gaze told me that there was something supernatural in it. Our temptation is always to brush aside little things. We brush aside beggars who beg us for help. We ignore people who knock at our doors. We ignore our grandchildren when they are impertinent. We ignore each other and don't communicate with each other. And as a family therapist, I know what I'm talking about. There are families who never communicate with each other. In this age of microwave ovens, and in this age of digital gadgets and gizmos, kanya-kanyang bukas ng refrigerator, kanya-kanyang kain, kanya-kanyang nood ng kanyang... There's no family TV anymore. You all watch your own shows in Netflix, in iFlix, in Tubi, in Movie, everywhere. In your own time, in your own private moment. And the digital natives now don't wait for Friday or Thursday, waiting for John and Marcia, because they can watch the whole episode of Crash Landing on You all in one sitting, called binge watching. And they spend 2 days watching all 3 seasons or 4 seasons of Ekaterina, of the Soviet, of Russia, and Catherine the Great, all 4 seasons in one sitting. We ignore one another. We don't listen to each other's stories. We are so impatient because we are trying to do what we want most. It may not have to do with stones being turned into bread. It may not have to do with power and glory being laid at your feet. It may not have to do with all the pomp and circumstance, the thunder and the lightning and the glory associated with the God who will save you at the last minute and will make a show of force in your favor. But the temptations are the same. It has to do with sleeping during homilies like now. It has to do with forgetting your night prayers. It has to do with ignoring the call of the Lord to be silent for a while, and as you wake up, the first thing you pick up is your cell phone and catch up because you have FOMO, fear of missing out. These are the temptations that we are facing. But today the Mass began with a positive note. We beg God to allow us the joy of perceiving and receiving the hidden richness of Christ. That hidden richness is what we hold on to. For dear life, for hope. The world is on the brink of a third world war. The pandemic is not yet ended. Many of us lost our jobs. Your savings are gone. You have spent it in the last 2 years, and you don't know what's coming up next. Today we hold on to the hidden richness of God, for that is our only richness that we can be sure of until kingdom come. Because that is the reason for everything we do. The reason why you are here this morning. The reason why you are doing your share of prayer, fasting, and almsgiving is because Christ has died and Christ is risen and Christ will come again.